One spring morning, Marcus found an injured baby squirrel by the roadside after waiting 4 hours with no sign of the mother squirrel appearing. He brought the tiny creature to the Wildlife Rescue Center. He operated veterinarian. Sarah confirmed it was a male squirrel about 3 weeks old with a minor leg injury. Marcus named him Rusty at the rescue center. 2 bobcats rescued from a forest fire Shadow, and Blay lived in enclosures near the recovery area. Shadow immediately took a liking to Rusty adopting and caring for the squirrel as her own. In contrast, Blay remained indifferent and sometimes annoyed by the newcomer. Rusty thrived under Shadow and Marcus's care, but tragedy struck when Shadow suddenly passed away from old age. Both Rusty and Blay fell into deep states of grief. The little squirrel refused to eat, constantly making pitiful cries while Blay paced restlessly in his enclosure, also refusing food amid their shared grief. Blay began to notice Rusty. At first, just curious glances, then, gradually, moving to gentle interactions through the barrier. Marcus recognized an opportunity for a new bond and decided to let them meet directly. A magical moment occurred when Rusty boldly climbed onto Blaz's shoulder and the bobcat, instead of objecting, stood, still accepting the squirrel's presence. This was the beginning of an unexpected friendship. A bond formed from shared grief and loneliness. The relationship between Blay and Rusty developed slowly, but steadily. Initially, both were cautious, trying to understand each other's boundaries and habits. For Blaze, this was a journey full of challenges. Show to care for a creature that, instinctively, he should hunt. The first issue was food. Rusty needed a completely different diet from Blay: nuts, berries, and sometimes small insects entirely different from the bobcat's meat diet. Marcus established separate feeding schedules, but he was surprised to see Blay becoming interested in Rusty's meals. The bobcat would sit nearby, watching intently as the squirrel nibbled on food. Sometimes, Blay would even try to bring food to Rusty by pushing scattered nuts toward him with his paw. The next challenge was teaching Rusty the basic life skills of a squirrel in nature. Baby squirrels learn how to climb, jump from branch to branch, and forage from their mothers, but Rusty had no squirrel mother to learn from. Marcus created an enriched environment for Rusty with branches, ropes, and climbing structures. He was amazed to see Blay actively participating in this process. The bobcat would gently encourage Rusty to climb by nudging him or going ahead to lead the way. When Rusty slipped, Blay was always there to catch him, gently holding the squirrel by the scruff to place him safely back on the ground. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah whispered, as they watched Blay patiently teaching Rusty how to jump from one branch to another. He's actually teaching the squirrel survival skills. One of the biggest challenges for BLA-1 was restraining his hunting instincts. When Rusty scampered about, squirrels move quickly and unpredictably, which typically triggers hunting responses in predators. Many times Marcus saw Blaze's body tense when Rusty suddenly darted across the room, but the bobcat had learned to control himself remarkably. As Rusty grew stronger, Marcus began allowing both to explore the sense-controlled garden area in this larger space. Their relationship was tested in new ways. BLA-1 became extremely protective, always alert to potential threats to Rusty. When large birds flew overhead or strange sounds occurred, BLA-1 would quickly move close to Rusty, sometimes shielding the squirrel with his body. One afternoon, their greatest challenge appeared. Rusty, caught up in his curious nature, climbed over a low fence into the larger garden area. Marcus was working in his office when he heard fierce growling looking out the window. He saw a neighborhood house cat stalking Rusty. Before Marcus could react, Blay leaped over the fence with astonishing agility for an injured bobcat. The bobcat stood between Rusty and the strange cat, fur raised and emitting threatening growls. The house cat quickly fled from the presence of a much larger predator. When Marcus arrived at the scene, he found Blay gently carrying Rusty by the scruff, bringing the squirrel back to the safe area. This protective action cemented their bond from that day on. Rusty seemed to trust Blay completely, and Blay became more protective of the little squirrel than ever. Their relationship developed in fascinating ways. Rusty began mimicking some of Blay-1's behaviors, such as how he washed his face and groomed his fur in turn. Blay-1 seemed entertained by Rusty's endless energy and curiosity, sometimes participating in games that an adult bobcat would normally not care about. On cold nights, Rusty would curl up in Blaz's warm fur. The bobcat would wrap his tail around the tiny creature, creating a natural blanket. This sight deeply moved the staff at the rescue center when autumn arrived, Rusty had developed into a healthy adult squirrel. His reddish-brown fur was thick and glossy, his eyes bright and alert. He had mastered most of the skills a squirrel needs to survive thanks to the patient guidance of Blay and Marcus. One morning, a small truck parked outside the rescue center. A group of staff from a nearby wildlife preserve came to visit. They had just rescued a group of orphaned baby squirrels that needed care before being released into the wild. After witnessing the special relationship between Blay 1 and Rusty, they suggested bringing the new squirrels to Marcus Center. They believed Rusty could help the baby squirrels adapt, serving as a big brother to them when the new squirrels arrived. Rusty was immediately curious. With careful supervision, Marcus allowed Rusty to interact with the baby squirrels. Rusty seemed to understand the nature of the situation, gently approaching and interacting with his smaller counterparts. But what no one anticipated was the impact this would have on Blay. The bobcat watched Rusty spending more time with his own kind, and gradually a change appeared in his behavior. Blay began to withdraw, spending more time alone, occasionally watching Rusty from a distance with sad eyes. Blay isn't eating as much as before, Sarah reported to Marcus. I think he's experiencing a kind of depression. Marcus realized that Bla1 was grieving not because of loss, but because of feeling abandoned as Rusty found his own kind in the following weeks. The baby squirrels developed quickly under Rusty's guidance and the staff's care. They were ready to be released into the wild by early spring. The big question remained: what would happen? With Rusty, the team from the preserve suggested taking Rusty along, with the baby squirrels releasing them all into the same forest area. Ecologically, this was the right decision. Rusty deserved the chance to live the natural life of a squirrel with his own kind. But Marcus worried about two things. Could Rusty survive in the wild after being raised by humans and a bobcat? And what would happen to Blay 1 if Rusty left? As the decision day approached, Marcus weighed the options. He observed Rusty, now fully grown, healthy, and increasingly drawn to his own kind. He also watched Blay the bobcat becoming increasingly withdrawn and sad. Finally, Marcus made his decision. Rusty needed freedom, but before that happened, he needed to help Blay 1 understand and accept. In the final days before releasing Rusty, Marcus spent more time with Blay, bringing the bobcat claws to Rusty and the baby squirrels, trying to help him understand that this was natural and necessary. The day to release Rusty and the baby squirrels came on a beautiful spring morning. When it was time to catch Rusty, Marcus felt a pang in his heart. The squirrel had become an important part of his life, and he knew Blay 1 felt the same, perhaps even more strongly. To everyone's surprise, Blay 1 exhibited unexpected behavior when they approached Rusty. Instead of withdrawing or showing aggression, the bobcat approached the squirrel, gently licked his head, and then, what shocked Marcus, Blay gently nudged Rusty toward the transport cage. "It's unbelievable," one of the visitors whispered, almost as if he understands what's happening. Marcus wasn't sure if Blay 1 truly understood, but the bobcat's actions made the parting moment less painful. Rusty hopped into the cage, looking back at Blay one last time before the truck carrying him and the other squirrels departed, heading to a forest about 20 minutes away. The days after Rusty left were difficult. The rescue center, Blay 1 refused to eat for nearly 2 days, spending most of his time lying where Rusty used to sleep. The third day, Blay 1 began eating again, and when Marcus brought in a newly orphaned baby rabbit, the bobcat showed interest rather than indifference. 6 months passed since Rusty was released into the wild. One day, Marcus decided to drive to the area where Rusty had been released. Following an impulse, he brought Blay along. They arrived at a quiet forest with tall oak and pine trees. Marcus led Blay to a small area near a stream and sat down on a log, the bobcat secured on a safety leash beside him. They sat in silence, listening to the wind rustling through the leaves. After about an hour, Marcus decided it was time to head back. As he stood up, a small sound from above caught both their attention. On a branch not far away, an adult squirrel with familiar, reddish-brown fur was watching them. Marcus held his breath, not daring to believe his eyes, but Blay recognized him immediately. The bobcat made a soft sound that Marcus only heard when he called for Rusty the squirrel, for it was indeed Rusty. Moved down the tree trunk with the agility of a true wild squirrel. He stopped at a safe distance, head tilted as if assessing the situation. Then, in a moment that nearly brought tears to Marcus's eyes, Rusty approached Blay. The bobcat lay down, lowering his head to be level with the squirrel. Rusty moved closer and, just like old times, climbed onto Blay's shoulder. The bobcat emitted a deep purr from his chest. They stayed like that for several precious minutes before Rusty gently detached himself. The squirrel ran up to a nearby branch and disappeared into the foliage, but only momentarily. He returned, not alone. 3 smaller squirrels followed him, jumping and running around the branch. "He has his own family now," Marcus whispered. Unable to hide his smile, Blay One observed the baby squirrels with curiosity, his head tilting with each of their movements. Rusty seemed to be introducing his children to his foster father, jumping up and down the branch, occasionally looking at Blay as if to ensure the bobcat was still watching. When it was time to leave, Marcus gently pulled on Blay's leash. The bobcat stood up, but continued looking up at the tree where Rusty and a small family were watching. Rusty made one final call, as if saying goodbye before leading his children deeper into the forest on the way back to the center. Marcus noticed a change in Blay's. The bobcat seemed more peaceful, no longer carrying the sadness of the past months. Perhaps, like Marcus, Blay had understood that true love sometimes means letting go upon returning to the center. Blay One began spending more time with other small animals in need of care. The bobcat seemed to have found a new purpose, becoming a protector for vulnerable creatures at the rescue center. Marcus documented the story of Blay and Rusty in a book, sharing with the world the extraordinary friendship between 2 species. Thought to be incompatible, the story quickly spread, inspiring many people and raising awareness about wildlife conservation. Each spring, Marcus and Blay would visit that forest. Sometimes they would see Rusty, sometimes not. But what mattered was that they knew the squirrel was living the life he deserved, free, wild, and still connected to those who'd saved and loved him. The bond between Blay One and Rusty taught Marcus an invaluable lesson: love can overcome all natural barriers, and sometimes the most meaningful relationships emerge from the most unexpected places. This extraordinary connection between predator and prey challenged everything Marcus thought he understood about animal behavior and the rigid boundaries of nature. It demonstrated that compassion and companionship could transcend instinct, revealing a deeper emotional intelligence in animals than science had previously acknowledged. As Marcus documented their story in his journal, and later in a book that touched hearts worldwide, he reflected on how this unlikely friendship had fundamentally changed his approach to wildlife rehabilitation. No longer did he view animals merely through the lens of biological classification or evolutionary programming. He now recognized their capacity for emotional complexity and adaptation. The story of the bobcat and squirrel became a powerful metaphor for how trauma can create bridges between the most unlikely souls, and how healing often comes through connection rather than isolation. Wildlife experts and behavioral scientists from universities across the country began visiting the center to observe this remarkable relationship, bringing with them a fresh perspective on cross-species bonding and challenging long-held assumptions about animal consciousness. The research spawned from Blay One and Rusty's relationship eventually contributed to significant advancements in wildlife rehabilitation techniques and a deeper understanding of animal grief and emotional attachment for Marcus. Personally witnessing this extraordinary friendship reaffirmed his life's purpose. On difficult days when funding was shorter, when he lost an animal he couldn't save, he would watch Blay One and Rusty together and find renewed strength. Their relationship was living proof that sometimes the most beautiful outcomes arise from the darkest moments, and the nature, for all its harsh realities, still harbored endless capacity for wonder and grace. Years later, long after Rusty had returned to the wild, visitors to the center would still hear the story of the bobcat, who became a father to an orphaned squirrel. Children would press their faces against the glass of Blay's enclosure, whispering the tale to each other as the aging bobcat dozed in the sunlight, his legacy of love continuing to inspire generations of conservationists and animal lovers alike.